Picture yourself 6 months from now. You wake up. You check your phone. You scan your life for evidence that something has shifted, and the same quiet heaviness settles in. The same one you felt this morning, and the morning before that, and every morning for as long as you can remember. The circumstances are the same. The bank account is the same. The relationships are the same. The invisible ceiling pressing down on everything you try to build is still exactly where it was. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a thought forms that you've been trying not to think for a long time. Maybe this is just how it is for you. Now picture a different version. Same morning, same phone, same mirror. But something inside you is different. Not something you added. Something you finally understood. A shift so fundamental that the world around you had no choice but to reorganize itself around it. Not because you performed a better ritual, not because you found a more powerful affirmation, because you finally saw the mechanism, the one that's been operating beneath every experience you've ever had. And once you saw it, you could never unsee it. And everything that followed was different, not gradually, structurally. One of those futures is where you're heading right now. And the difference between them has nothing to do with luck, talent, worthiness, or the universe deciding you've suffered enough. Neville Goddard would tell you the difference comes down to a single thing. Whether you understand how manifestation actually works, or whether you keep operating on a model that was broken before you started using it. Goddard spent over 30 years teaching in lecture halls, living rooms, and radio broadcasts across America. He published books. He gave hundreds of recorded lectures. And in all of that time, across all of that material, he never once asked you to raise your vibration. He never mentioned the law of attraction. He never told you to petition the universe or trust some external timeline. What he taught was so much simpler and so much more confronting than any of that. He taught that consciousness is the only reality. That your assumptions, not your wishes, not your affirmations, not your vision boards, your deep, often unconscious assumptions about who you are and what's possible for you, are generating your physical experience with mechanical precision. And that once you understand how this mechanism operates, your entire relationship with reality changes. Not because you've learned a new skill, because you've recognized a power you've been using, badly, your entire life. Today I'm going to show you the 5 critical inversions that separate people who understand how manifestation works from people who keep performing techniques that produce nothing. Why everything the mainstream manifestation space teaches you is precisely backwards from how the mechanism actually operates, and what shifts permanently when you finally see the machinery beneath your experience. Here's where the problem starts. You came to manifestation looking for a tool, something to add to your existing life. You heard that you could visualize, affirm, script, meditate, and somehow attract what you want into your experience. So you added those things. You added a morning visualization routine. You added a nightly affirmations. You added a gratitude journal. You added a vision board. You stacked technique on top of technique, like you were building a tower that would eventually reach the life you wanted. And the tower went nowhere, because you were adding tools to a consciousness that was still producing the same reality it always had. You didn't need more tools. You needed a different understanding of the machine you were already operating. And until you get that understanding, not intellectually, not as a concept you can repeat, but as something so clear you feel it reorganize how you see everything, no technique in the world will produce what you're looking for. Goddard didn't teach techniques. He documented a mechanism, and what he discovered inverts almost everything the modern manifestation space has taught you to believe. The first inversion is this. You think manifestation is something you do. It's something that's already happening. This is the foundational misunderstanding that corrupts everything else. You approached manifestation as an activity, something you sit down to perform. You meditate for 20 minutes. You visualize for 10. You script for 15. And then you get up, go about your day, and wait for the manifestation to arrive. as if the 20 minutes of deliberate imagining is the creative event and the other 16 hours are neutral. Goddard would tell you there is no neutral. There has never been a neutral moment in your entire life. You are manifesting right now, reading these words. You were manifesting in the shower this morning when you ran through tomorrow's problems. You were manifesting in the car when you rehearsed the argument with your boss. You were manifesting at 2 a.m. when you woke up and your mind immediately started calculating how much money you don't have. Every moment of consciousness is a creative event. Every assumption you hold is producing its physical equivalent. Every inner conversation you run is planting a seed that will produce an identical harvest. This means the life you're living right now is not the absence of manifestation. It's the presence of it. It's the perfect, faithful, mechanically precise output of everything you've been assuming, imagining, and feeling, most of it completely unsupervised. You haven't been failing to manifest. You've been manifesting with extraordinary precision. You just didn't choose what was being manifested because you didn't know the machine was running. Goddard observed this in students who came to him desperate. They'd say their manifestation wasn't working, and he wouldn't comfort them. He'd ask what they'd been imagining between sessions, what inner conversations they'd been running at the grocery store, in the waiting room, lying in bed, what they assumed about themselves when nobody was watching and they weren't performing their manifestation routine, and the answer always revealed the problem. They were manifesting deliberately for 20 minutes and manifesting by default for the rest of the day. And the default, because it carried more repetition, more emotional charge, and more genuine feeling, was what the subconscious accepted as its operating instructions. This is why adding a technique to your existing consciousness changes nothing. Your morning visualization is a single seed planted in a field where your habitual imagination has been scattering thousands of seeds all day, every day for decades. The field produces everything it's been given, and the harvest matches the seeds. Not the ones you chose during meditation, but the ones your unconscious mind has been dropping without your knowledge or consent every waking hour. Once you understand this, truly understand it, not as a concept, but as something you can observe in real time, manifestation stops being something you sit down to do. It becomes something you recognize is always happening. And the question shifts from, how do I manifest what I want, to, what am I manifesting right now, in this moment, with this assumption, with this inner conversation, with this feeling I'm carrying through my afternoon. That shift in question changes everything, because now you're not adding a practice. You're becoming aware of a process that was always there. The second inversion cuts even deeper. You think the goal is to change your thoughts. The goal is to change your state. The entire personal development industry is built on the premise that thoughts create reality. Think positive, and your life improves. Catch negative thoughts and replace them with positive ones. Monitor your self-talk. Change your inner dialogue. And on the surface, this sounds reasonable. It even sounds like what Goddard taught. But Goddard drew a distinction that most people miss entirely, and missing it is why thought monitoring produces so little lasting change. Thoughts are surface phenomena. They come and go. You can have 100 different thoughts in an hour, and none of them may reflect what you actually assume to be true at the deepest level. You can think, I am wealthy, while living in the state of someone who fundamentally believes money is scarce. You can think, I am loved, while living in the state of someone who assumes they'll always be abandoned. The thought sits on top of the state like paint on a wall. It covers the surface. It doesn't change the structure. And the subconscious, which builds your reality, doesn't respond to paint. It responds to structure. A state in Goddard's framework is something fundamentally different from a thought. A state is the total atmosphere of your being at any given moment. It's not what you're thinking about. It's where you're thinking from. It includes your assumptions, your feeling tone, your sense of self, your baseline expectation of what's possible. Two people can have the identical thought, I'm going to get that promotion, and be in completely different states. One is in a state of confidence and expectation. The other is in a state of desperation and hope. Same thought, different states, different realities produced. Goddard taught that you don't change your life by changing your thoughts. You change your life by changing the state from which your thoughts arise. Because when you shift to a new state, the thoughts that emerge from it change automatically. The person living in the state of abundance doesn't need to monitor their money thoughts. Their thoughts about money are naturally aligned because they're arising from a different foundation. The person living in the state of being loved doesn't need to affirm their worthiness. Their inner conversation about relationships is automatically different because the state is different. Think about the times in your life when your state shifted naturally. Falling in love, getting a job you were excited about, a period where everything seemed to flow. Your thoughts didn't change because you worked on them. They changed because you entered a different state, and different thoughts are native to different states. You didn't have to force positive thinking. Positive thinking was the natural output of the state you were in. This is why affirmation practice exhausts people. They're trying to force thoughts that are incompatible with the state they're occupying. It's like trying to produce tropical plants in Arctic soil. The thought can't survive in the state. It requires constant effort, constant replanting, constant conscious maintenance. And the moment you stop maintaining, the native thoughts of the state you actually occupy rush back in. Goddard's instruction was radical in its simplicity. Stop working on your thoughts. Enter the state that would naturally produce the thoughts you want. And the way you enter a state is not by thinking about it. It's by assuming the feeling of already being in it. Not analyzing the state, not describing the state. Feeling the state from within, as someone who already lives there. This is the difference between standing outside a house describing what it looks like and actually walking through the front door and living inside it. One is observation, the other is occupation. And only occupation changes your reality. The third inversion is the one that shakes people the most because it contradicts the single most common instruction in the entire manifestation space. You think feeling good is the target. Feeling natural is the target. You've been told to raise your vibration, get excited about your desire, feel the joy of having what you want, amplify positive emotion, generate enthusiasm, and you've tried. You've pumped yourself up during visualization. You've forced excitement about outcomes that haven't arrived. You've tried to feel joy about things your life currently contradicts, and the emotion lasted for a few minutes, maybe an hour if you were really disciplined, before the familiar feelings returned and you were back where you started. Goddard identified why this approach fails, and the reason is mechanically precise. Excitement is the emotion of anticipation. It's what you feel about something that hasn't happened yet. Joy about a future event confirms the event is in the future. Hope about an outcome confirms you don't currently have it. Every emotion oriented towards something you want broadcasts a signal of not having. And the subconscious, which generates your reality, based on what you're actually experiencing, not what you're trying to experience, faithfully produces more not having. Think about something you already possess that you once desperately wanted, a home you've lived in for years, a relationship that's settled into comfortable familiarity, a job that's become routine. How do you feel about these things? Not excited, not hopeful, not vibrating at a high frequency. You feel nothing particular about them. They're just your life. They're just there. That absence of emotional charge, that quiet, unremarkable normalcy, is the feeling signature of reality. Things that are real don't excite you. They just are. Goddard called this the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and it is the most misunderstood concept in his entire body of work. People hear feeling and think emotion. People hear wish fulfilled and think celebration. But the feeling of the wish fulfilled is neither emotional nor celebratory. It's the calm, settled, taken for granted sense that what you desired is already just how things are. It's the Tuesday afternoon feeling, the random Wednesday, the moment 3 months after getting what you wanted when you've stopped thinking about the fact that you got it because it's become background, ordinary, unremarkable, absorbed into the texture of your normal life, This is what Goddard asked his students to generate. Not excitement, normalcy, not the thrill of getting something, the absence of wanting something because it's already there. When a student could imagine their desired outcome and feel nothing exceptional about it, when it provoked the same emotional flatness as thinking about their own name, that was when Goddard said the impression would take, because the subconscious recognized that emotional signature as the signature of something real, and it built accordingly. Here's why this is so difficult. Normalcy isn't dramatic. It doesn't feel like you're doing anything powerful. The excitement of visualization feels productive. The emotional high feels like energy being directed toward your goal. But that energy is actually the energy of distance. The felt gap between where you are and where you want to be. When the gap closes, when you genuinely feel that the wish is already fulfilled, the energy dissipates into quiet certainty, and quiet certainty doesn't feel powerful. It feels like nothing, which is exactly what reality feels like. Goddard gave a comparison that made this viscerally clear. He asked his students how they felt about the sun rising tomorrow morning. Not excited, not hopeful, not anxious about whether it would happen. Complete indifference, total certainty expressed as the absence of any emotion about it whatsoever. That indifference, he said, doesn't prevent the sunrise. The indifference is a byproduct of absolute knowing, and that's the relationship between your emotional state and your manifestation. You don't need to feel excited for it to arrive. You need to feel so certain that excitement becomes irrelevant. The fourth inversion addresses the mistake that keeps people trapped in cycles they can see but can't break. You think the physical world is the cause. It's the print. Every morning you wake up and scan your circumstances. You check your phone for notifications that might confirm something has changed. You look at your bank balance. You assess your relationship. You evaluate your body, your career, your opportunities. And whatever you find, whatever the physical world shows you, you react to it. If the balance is low, you feel lack. If the relationship is strained, you feel unloved. If the opportunity hasn't appeared, you feel stuck. And those reactions, those feelings generated by your circumstances, become the instructions the subconscious uses to build tomorrow's reality, which looks exactly like today's. Goddard called this the fundamental error of consciousness. Most people take the physical world as the starting point and their inner state as the response. Something happens and they feel accordingly. Circumstances dictate state. The bank account dictates how they feel about money. The relationship dictates how they feel about love. The mirror dictates how they feel about themselves. But the mechanism works in reverse. The state comes first. The circumstances follow, always, without exception. What you're seeing in the physical world right now is not current reality. It's old news. It's the delayed printout of a state you occupied previously, days, weeks, sometimes months ago. You're looking at the harvest of seeds you've already planted and reacting as if they're the seeds themselves. You're reading last week's newspaper and panicking as if it's tomorrow's forecast. This is why reactive people stay stuck. They receive the printout, react to it emotionally, and that emotional reaction becomes the state from which the next printout is generated. The bank balance triggers fear. The fear becomes the state. The state generates the next balance, which triggers more fear. The loop is perfect, self-reinforcing, and invisible to anyone who doesn't understand that the physical world is the effect, not the cause. Goddard was uncompromising about this. He told his students that reacting to circumstances is the most expensive habit a human being can have, because every reaction is a creative act. Every time you see something you don't want and respond with the feeling of not wanting it, you've just given the subconscious a fresh instruction to produce more of what you don't want. You've just planted today's seed with yesterday's harvest. The correction isn't positive thinking. It isn't pretending circumstances don't exist. It's understanding what circumstances actually are, a delayed reflection of a previous state, and refusing to let them dictate the state you occupy now. You look at the bank balance, and instead of falling into the state of lack, you consciously return to the state of the wish fulfilled. You feel the financial reality you've been assuming in your nightly imaginal act, not as a performance. As a recognition that the balance you're seeing is the printout of an old state, and the state you're choosing now is what generates the next printout. This is what Goddard meant by living in the end, not ignoring the present, not denying what you see. Understanding that what you see is the shadow of a previous state and choosing to cast a different shadow by occupying a different state right now. The print changes when the negative changes, and the negative is your state of consciousness. A woman came to Goddard's lectures having spent 2 years trying to manifest financial freedom. She visualized every morning. She affirmed every night. And every afternoon she sat at her kitchen table, opening bills and feeling the full weight of her debt. The 2 years of morning visualizations couldn't compete with 2 years of afternoon debt feeling, because the afternoon sessions carried genuine emotion, real dread, real constriction, real despair, while the morning sessions carried manufactured optimism that her entire nervous system recognized as pretense. Goddard didn't tell her to visualize harder. He told her to stop giving the bills the power to determine her state, to open them from within the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not by ignoring them, but by occupying a state so settled in financial security that the bills became administrative details rather than emotional triggers. The shift wasn't in her technique. It was in what she allowed to dictate her state. The fifth inversion is the one that separates people who get temporary results from people whose entire reality restructures. You think persistence means repeating the technique. Persistence means maintaining the state. Most people who learn Goddard's framework focus on the nightly imaginal act. They construct a scene. They enter it in first person. They feel it as real. They loop it as they drift to sleep. And many of them do this with genuine skill. The scene is vivid. The feeling is present. The drowsy state is accessed. The technique in isolation is excellent. And then they wake up, and within minutes, sometimes seconds, they leave the state. They check their phone and the circumstances haven't changed, and the state of the wish fulfilled evaporates like mist. They walk into their day occupying the same state they've always occupied, the state their history built, the state their fears maintain, the state their habitual inner conversations reinforce every hour. And they do this all day. 16 hours of habitual state followed by 10 minutes of deliberate state before sleep. Goddard was painfully honest about the arithmetic. The subconscious responds to the dominant impression, the one carried with the most frequency, the most genuine feeling, the most repetitive reinforcement. 10 minutes of deliberate impression at night cannot overpower 16 hours of habitual impression during the day. Not because the mechanism doesn't work, because the dominant signal is the one the subconscious obeys. And for most people, the dominant signal is the state they default to when they're not consciously performing their manifestation practice. This is why Goddard said the nightly imaginal act is the beginning, not the end. The real work, the work that actually changes physical reality, is the daytime discipline of maintaining the state you assumed before sleep. Every moment becomes a checkpoint. Every inner conversation becomes a creative act you either allow to run on autopilot or redirect toward the state of the wish fulfilled. Every time a circumstance triggers a reaction that contradicts your desired state, you have a choice: fall into the old state or return to the new one. And that choice, made hundreds of times a day, is what persistence actually means. Goddard compared it to a ship's course. You set the course at night during your imaginal act, but the ocean pushes back all day. Waves of doubt, currents of habitual thinking, storms of circumstantial reaction. If you abandon the course every time a wave hits, you never reach the destination. Persistence isn't setting the course once. It's holding the course against everything the ocean throws at you. This doesn't mean you never experience doubt or reaction. It means you don't live there. A wave of fear hits and you feel it. You don't deny it. But you don't unpack your bags and move in. You feel it, recognize it as the old state attempting to reassert itself, and you return. You redirect the inner conversation. You re-enter the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not with effort or strain, with the quiet stubbornness of someone who knows where they live and refuses to be moved. Goddard told his students that the people who experienced the most dramatic shifts in their physical reality weren't the ones with the best visualization technique. They were the ones with the most relentless daytime discipline. The ones who caught themselves 10, 20, 50 times a day drifting into old states and redirected. The ones who treated every inner conversation as a creative event and refused to plant seeds that contradicted what they'd assumed before sleep. The technique got them into the state. The discipline kept them there. And it was the keeping, the persistent occupation, that the subconscious finally accepted as the new instruction. Now here's what happens when all 5 of these inversions click into place simultaneously. When you stop treating manifestation as a technique and start recognizing it as a constant process. When you stop managing thoughts and start occupying states. When you stop chasing emotional highs and start cultivating quiet naturalness. When you stop reacting to circumstances and start understanding them as delayed reflections. When you stop repeating a nightly ritual and start maintaining a daytime state. Something shifts that can't be undone. You start seeing the mechanism everywhere. You notice the inner conversation you're running while making dinner, and you recognize it as a creative act. You catch the assumption you're carrying into a meeting and you realize it's generating the outcome before the meeting starts. You feel the state you slip into when you see a certain person's name on your phone and you understand that state is what's been producing every interaction you've had with them. The mechanism becomes visible, and once it's visible, you can't pretend it isn't there. Goddard described this as awakening, but not in the mystical sense, in the mechanical sense. You wake up to a process that was always running, like someone who's been breathing their entire life and suddenly becomes conscious of each breath. The breathing doesn't change, the awareness of it does. And with awareness comes the ability to direct what was previously automatic. This is where responsibility enters, and it's the part that makes most people deeply uncomfortable. If the mechanism has been operating your entire life, then the life you're living is the product of that mechanism. Not parts of it, all of it. The job you're in, that's the harvest of states you've occupied. The relationships you've experienced, those are reflections of assumptions you've held. The money in your account, the health of your body, the opportunities that showed up and the ones that didn't. All of it was generated by the mechanism, fueled by your states, built from your assumptions, fed by your inner conversations. None of it was random. None of it was luck. None of it was the universe deciding what you deserved. It was you, operating the mechanism, without knowing you were operating it. Goddard never softened this. He didn't offer an escape clause. He didn't say some things are manifestation and some things just happen. He said everything is manifestation. Everything is the product of consciousness. And the viewer who truly absorbs that, not as an inspiring idea, but as a recognition of how their reality has been functioning all along, can never go back to believing that life happens to them. But Goddard also offered something alongside the confrontation. If the mechanism built your current reality from unconscious states, it will build a different reality from conscious ones, with the same precision, with the same faithfulness. The mechanism doesn't care whether the instructions are deliberate or default. It builds whatever it receives. So if you learn to give it deliberate instructions, through the feeling of the wish fulfilled, maintained not just at night but throughout the day, it will build what you've instructed with the same mechanical reliability it's been using to build everything you didn't want. The method itself is almost insultingly simple. Goddard could have built a system with levels and stages and certification programs. Instead, he gave the same instruction for 30 years because nothing else was needed. Define what you want with specificity, not vaguely, specifically. Construct a brief scene that would naturally occur after your desire is already fulfilled. Not the moment of receiving, a moment that implies receiving is old news. Enter the scene in first person. See through your own eyes, hear with your own ears, feel with your own hands. Saturate the scene with the feeling of naturalness, the quiet, taken for granted certainty that this is simply your reality now. Enter the drowsy state, those moments before sleep when the conscious mind relaxes and the subconscious becomes receptive, and loop the scene. Let yourself fall asleep inside it. Then wake up and do the real work. Carry the state into the day. Catch the old assumptions when they surface. Redirect the inner conversations when they contradict the state you assumed last night. Feel the old reactions when circumstances push back and return, again and again and again, to the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Not as a performance, as a homecoming, as someone returning to the state they've chosen to live in, regardless of what the delayed printout of old states is currently showing them, and persist. Not for a weekend, not for a week, until the naturalness you've been generating in imagination becomes the naturalness you feel when you open your eyes, until the gap between the imaginal state and the waking state disappears, until having is no longer something you practice before sleep, but something you carry through every hour. Goddard said the manifestation arrives when the assumption feels natural, when you're no longer trying to feel it but simply living from it, and the time that takes is entirely up to you, not up to the mechanism, not up to the universe, up to how quickly you can make the new state feel like home. Goddard was asked by a student once how he would know when the impression had taken, when the subconscious had accepted the new state, and Goddard's answer was characteristically precise. He said, "You'll know because you'll stop wanting it. The desire will dissolve, not because you gave up, because desire is the feeling of absence, and you can't feel the absence of something that already feels present. When the wanting dies, when you think about your desire and feel the same unremarkable normalcy you feel about your own heartbeat, the impression has taken. And the bridge of incidents, the chain of ordinary events connecting where you are to where you assumed you'd be, has already begun forming. Not through mystical forces, through the same mechanism that's been producing everything in your life since the day you became conscious. What Goddard understood, and what changes everything when you understand it too, is that there is no separation between the one who manifests and the mechanism of manifestation. You are not using a tool. You are the tool. Your consciousness isn't interfacing with reality. It's generating it. Every state you occupy is a set of instructions. Every assumption is a blueprint. Every inner conversation is raw material being fed into a construction process that never stops, never pauses, never takes a day off. The building crew, your subconscious, works around the clock, through sleep, through distraction, through every moment you're not paying attention, and it builds whatever it's been given, faithfully, precisely, without judgment or evaluation. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. Every day becomes a conscious creative act instead of an unconscious one. Every assumption you notice yourself holding becomes a question. Is this what I want to build? Every inner conversation becomes a choice. Is this the seed I want to plant? Every emotional reaction to a circumstance becomes an opportunity. Will I let this old printout dictate my new state? Or will I return to the state that generates the printout I actually want? This is what Goddard meant when he said, understanding how manifestation works changes your life. Not because you gain a new ability, because you recognize an ability you've always had. Not because the mechanism starts working, because you finally see that it never stopped. Not because something external shifts, because something internal becomes so clear, so undeniable, so mechanically obvious that the external world, which was always just the reflection, has no choice but to show you something different. And here's what compounds when you live from this understanding consistently. Every night you fall asleep in the state of the wish fulfilled, the old assumptions lose a fraction of their grip. Every day you catch a contradictory inner conversation and redirect it, the new state grows a fraction more stable. Every time you see the old printout and choose not to react from the old state, you weaken the loop that's been running your life on autopilot. It compounds. A little more each day, a little more each week, until one morning you wake up and the scan you've been running every day, the anxious check for whether anything has changed, doesn't happen. Not because you suppressed it, because the state you're living in doesn't produce that scan. The state of having doesn't check for evidence of having. It just has. And you realize the shift you've been looking for already happened. Not in your circumstances, in you. And the circumstances, because they were always just the print, are already starting to match. That's what Goddard taught. That's the mechanism that's been running your entire life. And from this moment forward, every state you occupy, every assumption you hold, every inner conversation you carry through your day is a conscious choice with consequences you now understand. The mechanism doesn't wait for you to be ready. It doesn't pause while you figure it out. It builds from whatever it's given, starting tonight, with whatever state you carry into sleep. Make it the state of someone whose wish is already fulfilled. Hold it when morning comes and the old world pushes back. Return to it when doubt arrives. Persist when nothing has changed yet in the print. And watch, not with desperation, but with the quiet certainty of someone who finally understands the machine they're operating, as the print begins to change.